Hello and welcome to the BookTube channel, Jack in the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide range of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. Today I have my June 2024 monthly reading wrap-up for you. And if you want to see how I rank books from my least favorite to my most favorite, then stay tuned because that is exactly what I'm going to do. I read 19 books in the month of June, spanning across a lot of different genres. But I do notice that I'm more heavily weighted in fantasy this month, with almost half the books I read being from that genre, which makes sense because I did complete some series this month. Overall, for the year, it is still weighted towards fantasy books, but you can see I have a lot more variety year to date. In particular, I'm seeing an increase in my general fiction reads for 2024, and I'm pretty pleased with that. In this video, I will have 4 categories of the reads: unranked, disliked, liked, and loved. I will have chapters down below if you want to skip around a little bit, but you should probably keep watching because there's one book in particular that I have some very passionate feelings about because BookTube has really done me dirty. Let's start with the unranked category. These are books that I did not rate. The first one is because it was a DNF. The book was Bright Young Women. This is by Jessica Knoll. This is a mystery type literary fiction. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with the book. This is like a true crime type book. It's an examination of the obsession with serial killers as entertainment. And that is something I hate. True crime. I don't find entertainment in the tragedy of others. So I don't like true crime podcasts or documentaries. I don't have any interest in it. I don't understand why we celebrate these criminals. But I heard that this book could be good if you are a critic of true crime. And so that's why I wanted to give it a shot. But for the reason I picked it up was the reason I didn't enjoy it. So I knew this may not be for me. I still wanted to keep an open mind, but I DNF'd it because I wasn't enjoying it. However, there is a market for this book because it does give the perspective of the women and the victims of this very popular killer that everybody knows but is unnamed in this book because we don't want to give him the spotlight. We want to really show the perspective of the victims. And something that's very specific to me, I don't like the anxious feeling I get when I read not a trope, but maybe the nobody believes me, everybody thinks I'm crazy, nobody's listening to me type thing. That makes me feel like powerless and helpless, and I don't like that feeling when I'm reading. And this book has a lot of that. So it just wasn't for me. I DNF'd it, and I will be unhauling this. The next unranked book is also a DNF for me in June, and that is The Book That Broke the World. This is the sequel to The Book That Wouldn't Burn, and I was not enjoying it, but I think what I'm going to do is I am going to wait until the final book comes out, book 3, and then I'm going to reread book 1 and then give this one another shot. I think if I read them all back to back, it won't feel as chaotic, I won't feel as lost because I will be in the world understanding what's going on a little bit better. So this one just felt really chaotic, and then we had a new character POV which just added to the disorganization that I felt, where I just couldn't connect to the story. So I will give this one another shot. Book 1 had the best atmosphere that I've ever read, this like library labyrinth, but starting this one off, we weren't in that library anymore. So that's why I wanted to read it, but I'll re-engage at a later date. The last book in the unranked category I did finish, but you'll see why I'm not going to put this with the other books. I checked out an audiobook from Libby. It was Spanish 2 by Pimsleur. So this was more of an educational read that I listened to, and that's why I can't really rank it against the other books because there's no plot, there's no characters. It is for a different purpose, but I still want to include it with my reading because I did read it. I am reading stuff for my language learning journey, and why not include it with this? So this is one of the 19 books that I read this month, and I liked this, first of all, because it was free. I checked it out through Libby, through my library. I loved the audio version. I love listening to the phrases, and this has English and Spanish, so I could understand. I wasn't always following along with it because it seemed kind of fast at times, even listening at I'm at 1x speed for this, but it was very helpful to at least expose myself to the language, and I could practice my speaking along with it as I would say the phrases as I'm listening to them. Time for the books that I disliked reading in June, and unfortunately there are quite a few in here. But hear me out, because I do think that there is a way to set your expectations for these books where they still might be for you. I always try to put some kind of positive spin on it. Unfortunately, the book that I liked the least in June, I don't know how much of a positive spin I can put on it. It was a book I checked out from Kindle Unlimited. It is a sequel. The book is Squeal, the Squeakquel, an Omega-verse romance by Vera Valentine. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that I dislike this book when I describe it to you as a really weird dark romance where the men have things that are actually balloon animals with like a balloon knot at the top that shoot funnel cake icing. I mean, with that kind of background, you can't expect these books to be a literary masterpiece. But actually, I really enjoyed book one. For as ridiculous as it was so interesting and fascinating, and that's why I picked up The Squeakquel. But it did this weird thing, and the author's note did mention this in the beginning. The author made the decision to do kind of like a parallel timeline, because my only complaint with book one is that the ending was rushed. So this book two actually overlaps the timeline so that she's like redoes the ending, but from a new character's point of view. And it didn't give me more context to that ending. I didn't like this new character that was introduced nearly as much. The novelty had kind of worn off for me about the weird, quirky, naughty things. So I just didn't enjoy this one. This one was kind of a letdown when book one was really worth it. The book I enjoyed slightly more than the smutty romance with balloon animal junk was The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder, a nonfiction by David Grann. This was a carryover from my May TBR when I was reading all nautical books. I didn't make it to this nonfiction, but I still wanted to check it out, especially because I've seen this everywhere. I think this was the 2023 Barnes & Noble Book of the Year, so it has an audience. And something I did like is that we have the shipwreck, and we learn that the biggest enemy of the castaways was not the environment, it was each other. And watching that play out in the dynamics was very, very, very fascinating. And something else that was kind of cool too, and it was just a quick scene, but what happens when you're starving for a long time and then you overeat, that was kind of an interesting point. So this didn't give me what I was looking for in terms of castaways trying to survive and battling the environment and trying to feed themselves, but it was an interesting exploration of how we are our own worst enemies, I guess. And it was interesting how these castaways still wanted to uphold naval law, like they were still documenting their justice system and how they came to their decisions because they still wanted to be proper. And like, look, if I'm a castaway on an island, the last thing I care about is being proper. Like, I care about survival. And there's no hierarchy anymore. Survival of the fittest, guys. A book that I enjoyed a little bit more than that one was Black Cake, a historical fiction by Charmaine Wilkerson. Black Cake would be a good choice for readers who like to explore sibling dynamics and also secret family pasts, because this one is about a brother and sister who have kind of had a falling out. They used to be really close, they're not anymore, but they come back together after their mom has passed away. She has left her famous black cake, I think in the freezer or something, like the last cake she ever made, and she leaves them an audio recording of her voice, and she says, "Don't eat this yet, you'll know the right time, but I need to tell you my story." And they find out that she has been hiding a secret her whole life, and this is like her confession of this life they never knew about. Look, I love, one of my favorite things in books is when there is a parent who has had a life outside of that role, and the family or the kids are always shocked about the past, right? Like, that is kind of an interesting dynamic. However, I found it really hard to connect to the characters, even the brother or sister, who I think we're supposed to like. I just couldn't connect to either one of them, and I didn't care about the mother's story. It sounds really bad, but there was nothing that interesting about it. I'm like, is this supposed to be shocking? Maybe if I was in that situation, I'd feel differently, but I'm like, this is kind of bland. Something I did like about this is the commentary on race, because we are dealing with a Black family. The mom was from the Caribbean, I think. And I like the Caribbean culture and what's described there. And I like how the kids kind of reference different things they encounter because of their skin color. The brother, I think he's darker skinned. I think the sister is a little bit lighter. And so there's like an interesting dynamic how they experience life differently. But the different things that like he's encountered, like they talk about how often he's pulled over and how he feels in that situation and things that he encounters in the professional world because of his race. So I liked that commentary. It's just the overall plot I didn't care about, and the characters I was not completely connected to. I am so sad that this next book is in the disliked category because it had one of the most unique synopses that I've ever read, and it was one of my most anticipated 2024 releases. Unfortunately, that book is The Last Murder at the End of the World, a mystery sci-fi by Stuart Turton. I checked this audiobook out from Libby. I had it on hold for a while, even before it was released. So I was so excited to finally listen to this dystopian sci-fi. The synopsis sounded really unique and intriguing. All of humankind has been wiped out, except for those that are on this tiny deserted island. There's a fog that has taken over everything, but for some reason this fog won't touch the island, and so that's why they are safe. Until one day, someone has been murdered, and for whatever reason, if people do not solve this murder in X amount of hours, the fog is going to close in and wipe them out. Another twist, everybody's had their memories wiped out. So as they're investigating this, they don't even know if they themselves could be the culprit of this crime. So it sounded really fascinating. I don't necessarily like sci-fi, but I like dystopia. So I still like to try and keep an open mind when it comes to sci-fi. Unfortunately, there were some other sci-fi elements introduced into the story that I'm not going to spoil for you, but it just made it so convoluted and very, very complex. And you know, when I think about it, Stuart Turton's other book, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, was also very jumbled with the plot. And so maybe that's something that just makes him a little bit special. I guess it still is true to his style of writing. But the other thing is, with a murder mystery, you have a lot of characters because you need to create that mystery, like the whodunit. So there's a lot of characters, but we switched to their POVs and they all blended together for me. They weren't unique characters with their own voice. So they all blended together with the addition of the sci-fi elements that just made it too, okay, I'm not gonna say too ridiculous, because I mean, even the synopsis is kind of unbelievable. It's like that fantasy sci-fi element, but it just made it too much for me to like take seriously. And okay, when you're reading a murder mystery and you don't care enough to even find out who done it, you know you dislike the book. So I listened to this audio, but I actually DNF'd it at 80%. I know, why didn't I just finish it, right? It's because I just really didn't care. But my personal threshold is if I get past 50%, I count it as read. So that's why this is still in the disliked category rather than unranked. But I just did not enjoy this one. We are still in the disliked category, but these next books are really on the verge because I can see more of why people would like them. So that's why these are ranked a little bit higher. The next book that I'm ranking for the month of June is What the River Knows, a Romantasy by Isabel Ibanez. I wanted to read this because I've heard fantastic things about it here on BookTube, and also because it takes place in Egypt and has Egypt mythology to it, and that is something that I don't see enough of. So I was really excited to pick this one up. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Veronica Speedwell series because you have this young woman who has a curious mind, but not a lot of rights. So that kind of reminded me a lot of Veronica Speedwell, but that's where the similarities end. So being set in Egypt, I liked it. I liked the descriptions of the food in particular. That was something that really kind of captured my senses when I was reading this. But the main character was insufferable. So she lives in Argentina, and her parents often travel to Egypt and stay there for a long time, kind of like treasure hunters. And she's always wanted to go to Egypt with her parents, but unfortunately she misses the opportunity because they go missing. And so she decides to run away from Argentina and travel to Egypt. She has a guardian there who actually controls all of her money. And I swear, like, the biggest plot point of this story was her and her uncle arguing of, like, him trying to send her home and her saying, but I traveled all the way here. Like, that happened so many times. Like, I feel like that was the whole plot. This is supposed to be a romantasy, mystery type book, kind of like a treasure hunting plot as they're searching for Cleopatra's tomb. But here's the thing. The magic is why I kind of dislike this book. Okay, well, the female main character, but also the magic, because it felt like an afterthought. It's this very light thing where she can touch an object and it links her to the person that used to own it, like Cleopatra, or it can direct her to another artifact so that to help her find the tomb. But it seems just like an afterthought, like it's thrown in there. Why aren't we paying more attention to this? Why aren't we spending more of our energy on this magic? There were so many missed opportunities in the plot to leverage this magic. I think if this would have leaned more towards the structure of The Mummy, which I've heard a lot of people compare this to that movie, it's still kind of like a treasure hunting element and there's still magic in it, but it just made a lot more sense in that one. And this one, like, no, it just didn't work for me. I hated the main character, the magic was lackluster, so that is why this is in the disliked category. However, I will be picking up the sequel when it comes out. I'll probably do it on Kindle Unlimited so I can read it for free. I won't be purchasing it because I might unhaul this. I'm not quite sure yet. A book that I enjoyed a little bit more than that was The Secret Life of Groceries, The Dark Miracle of the American Supermarket, a nonfiction by Benjamin Lohr. So much fantastic research went into this. I really appreciated what the author did to make this book happen. When I picked it up, I was hoping that it would be more about consumer decisions and maybe like society and our experience with groceries, but this did focus more on like supply chain management, which I was prepared for because someone commented on my TBR video that is what I should expect with this, and they were absolutely right. So I'm glad I had that expectation like reset for me. This is a book that I disliked because it wasn't what I was looking for, but I do think there's an audience for it because it was very fascinating to hear about the history of Trader Joe's, how they got set up, what made them special, and also learning more about the truck driving industry, particularly what female truck drivers go through. I have to admit that's not something I have often put a lot of thought into. So there is an audience for this. Supply chain management, and also if you like business case studies, this would be interesting because it's on like the whole industry and it takes like a holistic look at it. It's just, when I picked this up, like I said, I wanted more about like consumerism and like how society treats groceries, or maybe the waste we don't realize goes into it. I guess I wasn't looking for that broad of a scope. So that's why this is in the disliked category, but it may still work for you. A book that I enjoyed a little bit more than that, ironically, still has to do with food. This 2024 release is called Piglet. It is a literary fiction by Lottie Hazel. The summary of this book says that it is a stylish, uncommonly clever novel about the things we want and the things we think we want. Piglet is both an examination of women's often complicated relationship with food and a celebration of the messes life sometimes makes for us. It is about a woman who has a very successful career as the editor of cookbooks, and she loves cooking. Like, that is her love language, to cook for her fiance and her family. She likes to make really extravagant, fancy dishes, which had me salivating. I love descriptions of food in books. I mean, I also love watching Gordon Ramsay shows on TV, so this may not be a surprise to anybody who has seen my reading vlogs and knows that, but I love food, and I love the different descriptions of foods I've never tried and just her passion for it and how she sees it. So I liked that element of it. However, literary fiction is a genre I'm very interested in exploring more about. However, it's like hit and miss. There's very rarely in between, and this was just a miss for me because this woman, she goes by Piglet, That is the nickname she has, which I never reacted well to. I think it's kind of a demeaning nickname for someone that loves to eat. And she struggles with weight issues, and she has this fiance who makes a confession to her 13 days before their wedding, and she's really struggling with what to do, like move forward with the wedding or not. We don't really dive into too much of what that confession is, but you can kind of make assumptions, but how different people in her life react to that news. And what she does, but like her reaction is always to eat something. Like she'll go to a restaurant and she'll order everything on the menu and just like gorge on it. Like that's her way of dealing with things. This is a literary fiction that missed for me because I don't understand the point. I like slice of life, everyday mundane things, but this one just felt kind of pointless to me, other than enjoying the description of food. So that is why this is in the disliked category. It just wasn't very satisfying and I'm still hungry. The next book that I enjoyed slightly more, but it's still in the disliked category, actually for the same exact reason, is Big Swiss, a literary fiction by Jen Began. I picked up this audiobook because it sounded like a very fascinating plot. We follow a woman who transcribes audio recordings from a sex therapist, and he talks to someone that she names Big Swiss. Big Swiss is a middle-aged woman that is a very powerful force, a very powerful character. And our main character becomes obsessed with her and all of her sexual stories and exploits and just her personality. I will say something this book does have going for it was very unique characters that just jump off the page. Our narrator is kind of like a hopeless, grungy, kind of struggling type character, but Big Swiss is full of life and great perspective, and she's outspoken and she's intelligent. I believe she's a doctor. I think she's a gynecologist, and very, very interesting characters. So I will give you that. If you were a character-driven reader that likes unique characters, kind of grungy characters, then this could be a good pick. So our narrator becomes obsessed with Big Swiss, and then she meets her in real life. But she can't tell her how she knows her, and that she knows like all of her deepest, darkest secrets from transcribing these meetings with her therapist, right? But she recognizes her voice from the recordings and knows that it's her, and her obsession comes to life. So even though I love the characters in this, it is in the disliked category for the same reason Piglet was. There was just, I struggled to find a point in this. I was not satisfied with how this went. I felt like I just meandered through it, which I do think is part of literary fiction. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this book if you go into it with those expectations. But that's why a lot of lit fic kind of misses for me, because I need a little bit more closure and satisfaction. I need a point to what I'm reading. And where this one went, it didn't give me that closure. We have 2 books left in the disliked category. I told you there was a lot this month. And this is where it starts to get controversial, because these 2, I'm going to go against the crowd on this. The next book that I disliked in June was Empire of the Damned, a fantasy horror about vampires written by Jay Kristoff. This is the sequel to Empire of the Vampire, and reading that, I had the right expectations going into this, because book 1, I hated the writing style. So I knew I was going to have that writing style again. The problem I have is this is like an interview format. So we have our character who is like held prisoner, and he's being interrogated, kind of like he's telling his story. So he's telling his story to someone. And so we have that point of view, but then we're also like in the story. And even in the same chapter, in the same page, like not even a page break, the next paragraph will flip perspectives. And I find that really confusing. Each paragraph starts with quotation marks, because even if we're telling his story, like that's still dialogue, right? Even though it's just like setting the scene or something in the past. Really confusing writing style wise to get through that. Now the overall plot, I was interested in the plot in book 1, like where it ended up, and that's why I wanted to read book 2 and see where the plot went. And I figured, hey, understanding the writing style now, maybe it'll be better for me. But I feel like from page 1 up until the last chapter, we're in the same spot. We're in the same spot, like nothing really progressed. It was, what do we do with the Holy Grail in order to save the world from this endless night where vampires rule? And I don't know how much further along we are in that. And that's what was frustrating, is this is a really long book, and while stuff is happening all the time and it's fast-paced, nothing happened. That sounds weird. Like, if you're a reader, I think you know what I'm talking about. A lot happened and yet nothing happened. And for all these pages, it was unsatisfying. I didn't enjoy the writing style, and that's why this is in the disliked category. Sorry, guys. This is where we're going to get super controversial. So buckle up, I'm gonna hurt some feelings here. And I'm very passionate about my feelings on this because I just finished it like an hour ago. So how I feel in a week or a month might be completely different than right now. But right now, I'm heated because BookTube has done me dirty recommending this book. The book that I'm talking about is The Sword of Kagan, a fantasy by M.L. Wong. Listen, I know a lot of booktubers out there have recommended this as a standalone fantasy. Oftentimes, it's in the context of being their favorite standalone fantasy of all time. I could not disagree more. So I'm going to start with just the positive. The reason this is at the highest in the disliked category is because I still rated it 3 stars because the female main character, Misaki, was incredible. Probably one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. I love having a mature, experienced woman, which you don't often see in fantasy. And she has had 4 kids. She's a housewife, but everybody underestimates her and the life she had before she was a mother, before she was a wife. And she actually had a lot of skill, a lot of magic. And I loved seeing how her relationships evolved across all the people in her life once they realized how powerful she was, how intelligent she was, how strategic she was, how wise she was. All of these things. She is just a character I really, really enjoyed. If this was pitched more of like a literary fiction, I think I would have liked it. But it wasn't. It was pitched as a standalone fantasy. The first 40% of the book, I really liked. I liked the world building. I liked the elemental magic of controlling ice and water. I liked seeing the political stuff kind of brewing. Like, we have this emperor and, you know, the people serve the emperor, and they're the Sword of Kagan. They're supposed to be the warriors and protect the rest of the empire. So I liked where we were going with the politics for the first like 40%. And I actually remember I told my cousin, this might be a favorite book of all time. Like, I'm really enjoying where this is going. Then the middle happened, and it was so much trauma, so much violence. And look, I don't mind if there's violence in books. I'm not that sensitive. It was a lot of innocence being harmed, and it was descriptive, and it was violent, and it was lengthy. However, if I'm going to get that kind of trauma, I expect an equally impactful, satisfying conclusion. And this did not have it. And so what has me so passionately upset was the ending. So we had the first 40% that I loved. We had this middle section with all this trauma that I was not enjoying, but I was trusting the author to give me that satisfying ending. And then like the village starts to rebuild, and I liked that. I liked how Misaki showed her intelligence by, you know, okay, what businesses are going to be put in, like how are we going to bounce back as a village? I liked that. But it just fell off the map with the political and the magic. And it felt like this was supposed to be book 1, and M.L. Wong just abandoned the rest of the series. And there was an author's note at the end that she is discontinuing the world. This is a Theonite war story, and I think there's other books in this universe, so I don't know if they were intended to finish off the story. What happens? I'm so unsatisfied. I'm so unsatisfied, and I'm angry. I'm angry that I went through all that trauma without closure. I'm angry that this has been so highly regarded as a great fantasy standalone, and it's not a standalone. This is not a standalone. There needs to be more here. And because I'm so passionate, I'm going to make a powerful statement that I may retract later, but I think this is one of the worst fantasy books I've ever read. And I know I'm going to enrage some people by saying that. Like I said, if this was a literary fiction, I like it for that element, like from the character, but in terms of the magic and what was going on in the plot. So I guess it's the plot and the magic that I'm angry with. that it let me down. I cannot recommend this. I don't even know who to recommend this to because I'm so angry, guys. I'm so angry. And I know I'm probably going to get some pushback in the comments because when I said even that I was going to read this and it was on my TBR, so many people were like excited and like, can't wait to see what you think of it. And I'm so sorry, guys. Maybe okay, I don't know. I don't know what it is. See, I'm speechless. I just finished this an hour ago and so I have no words. But that's the end of the disliked category at least. Now that I've probably said the most controversial thing I've ever said on BookTube, let's move on to the liked category. The books that I liked the least was actually a trilogy. That is the War of Lost Hearts trilogy, a romantasy trilogy written by Carissa Broadbent. You might have seen me talk about this series a little bit because I actually read book 2 in my reading vlog where I was reading sequels. And so this is when I was reading book 2. But I read all 3 books this month. The first one I rated 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. The second one I enjoyed a little bit less. I think I rated it like 3 stars because it was kind of rough the first 70%, but the ending really caught me. And I was like, oh, that is a twist that I'm really interested in. And then the third book, I ended up rating 2 stars. It definitely read like a Kindle Unlimited book that was just so bloated. And with Kindle, if you're not aware, with Kindle Unlimited, authors get paid by how many pages the reader reads. So that's why they tend to be a little bit longer, and this felt like it. Again, it's a book where a lot was happening and yet nothing was happening. Fast paced, but like, where are we going with this? And I just really didn't care for it. As much as it intrigued me in the beginning, it just deflated me towards the end and I was so bored, didn't care. But on the bright side, this did have a female main character that I enjoyed a lot more. And I like the chemistry between our love interests. The twist in book 2 was very interesting to me. I kind of liked a little bit of how that direction went in book 3, but it just kind of deflated really quickly for me. But book 1 was so good. So that's why this is in the liked category, but on the lower end. The next book that I liked in June was Nothing to See Here, a Magical Realism by Kevin Wilson. If you have read and enjoyed The House on the Cerulean Sea, I think you'd really enjoy Nothing to See Here. It is about a woman who becomes the caregiver for 2 kids who just randomly combust into flames. They're fine, but their clothing burns off, everything around them burns, and she has to be a nanny for these kids. And they're really fun, quirky kids. I really enjoyed that dynamic. It reminded me a lot of House on the Cerulean Sea. So if you have a book hangover from that one, definitely pick this one up soon because it made me feel the same exact way. I loved seeing the relationship. I loved seeing how they deal with this really unique situation of the kids. Can you imagine your kid, your toddler having a temper tantrum and just bursting into a fireball? Kind of like that toddler from The Incredibles bursting into flames. Jack, I think of him too. Next, we are in the category of books that I loved reading in June. So first, I want to talk to you about the Tawny Man Trilogy, a fantasy trilogy written by Robin Hobb. If you haven't seen it, I made a dedicated reading vlog for the Tawny Man Trilogy, and it is completely spoiler-free. I'm really focusing on my reactions to the trilogy rather than recapping the plot. Please check it out. I absolutely adore how this vlog turned out, and this series does mean a lot to me. So in this trilogy, this is actually a sub-trilogy in a larger series called Realm of the Elderlings. So this is actually book 7, 8, 9, and you do have to read the other 6 books first. But we follow up with characters that we met in the first trilogy, and I love this first-person narration, this slice of life story, or this style. I love the magic. We have different magic that's like hereditary, called the skill, and they can like talk to each other telepathically. They can do different things with it. Then there's the wit, where they can bond with an animal and speak telepathically with animals, which I love me an animal companion. So please check that out to see how I rated all these books, What made me super emotional? Well, okay, I didn't tell you what made me super emotional because that would be a spoiler, but you can see my emotional reaction because I cry quite a bit in this. And this was just so impactful. I really loved this trilogy. It's time for the creme de la creme, the top of the loved list. My favorite read for June 2024 was My Husband, a literary fiction written by Maud Ventura. This is exactly what I mean, where sometimes literary fiction really hits for me because it's either going to be really low on the disliked list or it's going to be my favorite of the month. There's no way to know until I dive into it. This one was so weird. If you want an unhinged, unlikable narrator, this is the way to go. I almost thought it was gonna take like a thriller turn, but don't have that expectation. This is about a woman who is completely obsessed with her husband, and she tests him in little ways, and she writes it down in a notebook. So if he did something to piss her off, say he didn't hold her hand that day when he came home from work, she will go to bed without saying I love you. And she will face the other way when she falls asleep, like to punish him. And there's one scene where they're at a dinner party and someone else calls another wife at the table, like they're comparing the women to fruits. And someone else compares this woman to a pineapple, I believe. Her husband compares her to a clementine. Scandalous, right? And she loses her mind, and she's going on for like pages about how upset she is. She like takes her wedding ring off and she leaves it by the sink thinking that he gives a damn and notices anything is wrong. They go out to lunch one day and he orders lasagna and she spirals out of control with that, right? And so you're reading this and you're like, this woman is crazy. But then things go on and sometimes you're like, okay, maybe she's not as crazy, or maybe things are just different than I expected. The epilogue. The epilogue in this, my jaw hit the floor. I really hope you read this. This is so good. This would be great for like a book club discussion because the character is so different and messy, and I loved it. If you're looking for plot, maybe not the one for you. One might say this could also be like determined pointless, as I was just criticizing the other literary fictions that I read, but for some reason this just hit for me and I was entertained from beginning to end and really truly loved it. I mean, it was my favorite. It was my favorite of the month, so I mean, duh. So those are the 19 books that I read in the month of June. It was a lot of reading, some really hefty books, and definitely a lot of fantasy, as you can see, but even though there was a lot in the disliked category, it was still a really successful reading month. I knocked out a lot of books I've been wanting to read for a long time, and I'm still glad that I experienced them. And I do think there's an audience for a lot of these books. Even if they didn't hit for me, they could probably work for you. And that's why I love BookTube. It helps you set your expectations when you're picking up a book. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.